Chapter 11, Lesson 3, Layers of the Atmosphere. There's 4 main layers, and what are the characteristics of the layers? You can read this planet diary on your own. We start on page 387 for reading. It says, what are the 4 main layers of the atmosphere? Imagine taking a trip upward into the atmosphere in a hot air balloon. You begin on a warm beach near the ocean at an altitude of 0 kilometers above sea level. You hear a roar in the balloon's pilot turns up the burner to heat the air in the balloon, so heated air will make you rise. The balloon begins to rise and the Earth's surface gets further away. As the balloon reaches an altitude of 3 kilometers, you realize the air is getting colder. At 6 kilometers, you begin to have trouble breathing, and the air is becoming less dense. It's time to go back down. So the air became dense, and you had a hard time breathing, so you can only go so high in the hot air balloon. 6 kilometers is pretty high. In fact, it's higher than all but the very tallest mountains. But there are still hundreds of kilometers of atmosphere above you. It may seem as though air is the same from the ground to the edge of space. But air pressure and temperature change with altitude. So temperature and pressure change with the altitude. Scientists divide Earth's atmosphere into 4 main layers, classified according to changes in temperature. So they're classified changes in temperature, classified by their temperature. These layers are the troposphere, the stratosphere, the mesosphere, and the thermosphere. So those are our 4. We're going to keep track of those for when we can answer our questions. On page 388, what are the characteristics of the atmosphere's layers? The troposphere, I'm sorry, I missed this part up here. It says, unless you become an astronaut, you won't make a trip to the upper atmosphere, but if you could make the journey, what would you see? Read on to learn more about the conditions. The troposphere, you live in the troposphere in the inner or lowest layers of Earth's atmosphere. So this is where we live. Tropo means turning or changing. Conditions in the troposphere are more variable in the other layers. The troposphere is the layer of the atmosphere in which Earth's weather occurs. We have weather in our atmosphere. The other layers do not. I'm not going to read word for word. Although it's the shallowest layer, so it's the smallest, the troposphere is the most dense. It contains almost all the mass of the environment. So everything is pushing on top of it, so we're dense and we're heavy. As altitude increases in the troposphere, the temperature decreases. So it gets colder as you go far away. On average, for every 1 kilometer, the air gets 6.5 degrees Celsius cooler. Water here forms thin, feathery clouds of ice. We're going to turn to page 389. This one's going to be about the stratosphere. The stratosphere extends from the top of the troposphere to about 50 kilometers above Earth's surface. Strato means layer or spread out. The stratosphere is the second layer of the atmosphere, and it contains the ozone layer. The lower stratosphere is cold, about negative 60 degrees Celsius. Surprisingly, the upper stratosphere is warmer than the lower stratosphere. Not sure why. Oh, why is this? The middle portion of the stratosphere has a layer of air where there is so much more ozone than in the rest of the atmosphere. Because it holds the ozone, it's a different the ozone is a form of oxygen, and it has 3 atoms in each molecule instead of the usual 2. That's fancy. I hope you guys enjoy chemistry in high school. When ozone absorbs energy from the sun, the energy is converted to heat, warming the air. The ozone layer also protects living things from ultraviolet radiation from the sun. That's why we use sunblock. Oh, look at that little robot guy has his sunblock. You can look at this graph. It's the temperature in the atmosphere, how it's different in the other layers. Page 390, we're learning about the mesosphere. It says above the stratosphere, That's a very cool picture. A drop in the temperature marks the beginning of the next layer, the mesosphere. The meso means middle. So the mesosphere is the middle layer of the atmosphere. It begins at 50 kilometers above Earth's surface and ends at an altitude of 80 kilometers. In the upper mesosphere, the temperature approaches negative 90 degrees Celsius. Brr. The mesosphere is the layer of the atmosphere that protects Earth's surface from being hit by meteoroids. Meteoroids are chunks of stone and metal from space. We definitely don't want those hitting our Earth. What you see as a shooting star or meteor is a trail of hot, glowing gases that meteoroid leaves behind in the mesosphere as it burns up. Pretty crazy, huh? Look at that little guy. He says, "Brr, it's freezing." All right. The next page is 391. We're going to talk about the thermosphere. There's a couple different layers within the thermosphere too. Near the top of the atmosphere, the air is very thin. The outermost layer of Earth's atmosphere is the thermosphere. It extends 80 kilometers above Earth's surface, outward all the way into space. It has no definite outer limit. Heat in the thermosphere, we're talking about cold, and now it's getting hot. Sunlight strikes the thermosphere first, making the air very hot. Oh my gosh, it would just burn to pieces at 1,800 degrees Celsius. You wouldn't feel warm though. Why is that? Temperature is the average amount of energy of motion of each molecule of substance. So gas molecules in this layer, they move fast. So the temperature is very high. But the molecules are spaced so far apart in the air that's thin, so there aren't enough to collide with you and warm you up. Very interesting. If you guys want to pull up a video, we will watch a video too on this so that we can understand it a little bit better. Layers in the thermosphere. The thermosphere has two layers. The lower layer is the ionosphere. It begins at 80 kilometers above the surface and goes to 400. The exosphere is the outer layer. It extends about 400 kilometers outward for thousands of kilometers. That is the end of the lesson. So we're going to switch over to the questions.